In August 2020, Belarus was engulfed in a wave of protests that shook the nation to its core. These were the most massive anti-government protests in the country's history. They were sparked by the contentious presidential election, in which incumbent Alexander Lukashenko, who had ruled for more than 2 decades, was declared the winner. The opposition, who alleged rampant voter fraud, claimed that the election results were rigged. The protests quickly escalated and took on a life of their own. People took to the streets throughout the country, waving white-red-white flags, the symbol of a pre-Lukashenko era, and chanting slogans demanding his resignation. The government responded with a brutal crackdown, using force and arresting thousands of protesters, journalists, and opposition figures. Many faced torture and ill-treatment in detention, a fact that drew international condemnation. The government also imposed strict censorship measures, restricting access to independent media and information. The protests also had a major impact on the Belarusian IT industry. Many IT companies began relocating their employees and operations outside of Belarus due to the internet shutdowns and concerns about the political climate. This highlights the vulnerability of the IT industry in a country where free expression is suppressed. The international community, including the European Union and the United States, condemned the crackdown on protests and imposed sanctions on Belarusian officials and entities. The sanctions aimed to pressure the government to respect human rights and uphold democratic principles. However, the protests eventually fizzled out, and Lukashenko remains in power. The protests in Belarus were a testament to the deep desire for change among the Belarusian people. The events highlight the importance of democratic principles and human rights. However, the government's brutal crackdown on dissent shows how fragile democracy can be in authoritarian regimes. The Belarusian protests provide a compelling case study of the challenges facing democratic movements in authoritarian states. While the protests failed to oust Lukashenko, they brought global attention to Belarus' human rights abuses and authoritarian regime. They also inspired a sense of resistance that continues to linger even after the protests subsided. These protests demonstrate the power of the people and the tenacity of the human spirit in the face of oppression. They serve as a reminder that the fight for democracy is often fraught with challenges, but that it's a fight worth fighting. The story of the Belarusian protests is a story of courage, resilience, and hope. In the aftermath of the protests, the Belarusian government has continued to suppress dissent, imprisoning and silencing those who speak out against the regime. The legacy of these protests will continue to be felt in the years to come as Belarusians strive for a more democratic future.